Fucking OBS, dude. All right, we should be live. Okay, I could hear you. You should be able to hear me. Fuck. Just want to make sure that. Can you hear me? On the actual veto? Shout out to Laius Theon. Give me a 1 in the chat if you could hear me. We had some technical difficulties connection-wise. Perfect. Thank you.
Hello?
Ooh, that was loud. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you. All right, Truth Seeker's in the building. Shout out to Truth Seeker. We had some tech. Yeah, I got you. Can you hear me? You can't hear me? Yeah, I don't think you can hear me. Can you hear me or no? Yeah, for some reason, hold on a sec. I'm gonna make sure that this is.
I can hear you.
Yeah, we could hear you, but like for some reason you can't hear me when I ask questions. The audience can hear me. Yeah, they could. That's what's up. I'm trying to make sure that the guest, because the guest is not able to hear what I'm saying right now. Hold on a sec. Let me make sure my audio source is default. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
All right, perfect. And everybody, can you hear me? If you can hear me and the guests, we could keep this moving forward. So shout out to everybody in the building. This is Black Kemet on Trial. We started the live a little bit earlier. We had some technical difficulties, but we were going in on the skeptic, from the Discord server who wanted to challenge, some of the information that he had seen presented on the channel. So, Larry J, if you don't mind, just giving the audience just a brief synopsis of what you discussed before, and then we could get back into the conversation.
Yeah, so the two questions I had before were linguistic questions, like how do you address the chronological and geographical gap between ancient Egyptian texts and the emergence of West African languages? And why do mainstream historical linguists and Egyptologists reject these connections? And are they victims of bias? And is there a substantive methodological issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. Your audio sounds a little bit like robotic. It sounded better the first time, but let me see if I can help you out a little bit. So we can get into some of the methodological concerns. I think on the previous live when we were here, you asked a question about the historical linguistic aspects. So shout out to Sia Ghana Scythian Slayer. Shout out to Laius Theon. Shout out to True Seeker in the building. Appreciate y'all support. And we're gonna get into this. We're gonna have some fun here. So I'm going to talk about. Well, let me just for instance, like what is your perspective with regards to African languages? Like, what do you proponent of Afro-Asiatic, Niger Congo? Do you accept that distinction?
Yeah, I do, but I feel like a lot of them are very separate. in my opinion.
Like so, like Niger Congo versus Afro-Asiatic.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. The methodological issue is a very, very important issue to tackle, especially with regards to linguistic. That is an extremely important issue to tackle, and we will do our best in tackling that issue. So, bottom line is that when you're looking at African language families, most of these language families are going to be built by the Africanists. Are you familiar with the Africanists? You know,
No, I'm not familiar.
so they are le- uh, experts in African languages and cultures, typically of European descent, right? And they are people who colonial ethnographers are basically Europeans trying to define African populations for their colonial and imperialist interest. They are the ones who have came up with the majority of these classifications, and a lot of them were very racialist. So when you're looking at someone like Joseph Greenberg, who is the creator of many of the language families that we have today, if not all of them, in Niger Congo, Khoisan, Afro-Asiatic, these are considered defunct by mainstream historical linguists, right? And the Africanist school is actually the Africanist school is actually the most prominent. So when you talk about African cultures and histories, most people use the Africanist school as a rubric, especially when it comes to archaeology, genetics. They kind of willy nilly use categories from the Africanist school, particularly Greenberg's version of that, and they take Greenberg's mass comparison as the gospel. But if you look at, linguists like Paul Kapersky, he affirms that Greenberg's mass comparison method, what we discussed before in the previous live, is not valid when it comes to constructing Native American and African language families. And it doesn't have the ability to discern genetic relationships. So this is
Yeah.
what Greenberg himself said. He said that his multilateral comparative analysis was strictly a starting point. He said it was a starting point and it was not actually meant to try to discern genetic relationships. So that's the first major piece that we should take away from this is just the fact that when it comes to mainstream historical linguistics, Greenberg's language families are not seen as valid for historical linguists. They actually see them as invalid based upon the methodology that he used, right? And the previous question that you asked, Laius Theon asked, okay, so they're definitely not the same. Is that what you were saying, or the opposite? Okay, I'm listening. So the in the previous live we spoke about, you talked about just the geographic difference when it comes to ancient Egyptian and Inter-African. Do you want to tell the audience, re-ask that question again?
Yeah. How do you address the chronological and geographic gaps between ancient Egyptian texts from 3000 BCE to 400 CE and the emergence of written African languages?
Okay, so you come really, really prepared with that, and that's a good question. Now, in all actuality, that question actually helps the case because in linguistics, you talk about borrowing. You have people who borrow words and items for various reasons. Now, if you can find systematic correspondences between two languages at a very, very deep level, it's really difficult. Like if you don't have a mechanism for borrowing. So like if you're saying ancient Kemet and modern African cultures are chronologically separate by a very, very large gap, and they're geographically separate by a large gap, if you can find recurring, non-accidental sound correspondences between the basic vocabulary of the languages, it makes it very unlikely that it was borrowing, right? Like even we discussed in the previous live, we were talking about Indo-European and how Northern Indian languages are related, genetically related to European languages like English, French, and German, even though they're separate by a very, very massive distance, even a larger distance than in between ancient Kemet and modern African, like Western Central African societies. But that actually proves that they're related, and there wasn't like a borrowing mechanism from like northern India into modern European cultures. Does that kind of make sense? Are you still there? Oh shit! Did I disconnect again? I don't think so. Please no. It still shows that I'm live. Can everybody hear me? Press 1 if you can hear me. Yeah, I'm still live, but the control panel. Oh, he's off. He's off of the control room. He left. Yeah, this. Yeah, Sadiq is still one here. My guest fell off, but we're having a good conversation. And Jeremiah, yeah, he needs a basic course. He's simply ignorant of even correctly understanding historical linguistics for African languages, and he says he feels they are different. Yeah, no, Larry is a younger scholar, younger skeptic, and he was brave enough to come on. So like, he's a college student, pursuing engineering, if I understand correctly. So he wanted to come on just to be able to hash out a lot of these differences. So that's what's up. Yeah, and we're gonna get into when we get him back on. We're gonna get into some of the issues. I think. Are you back?
Hello.
Yeah, yeah, you're back. You're good. Perfect, perfect. So where did you leave off?
I left off about the my question about the gaps.
Yeah, the gaps and your avatar. Something's going on weird. Like your avatar, like it's coming in and out, in and out. This is kind of interesting. But yeah, so the gaps. No, yeah, Peace Bro been a while, but is he on BB2Me? No, I don't think he's aware of that platform. BB2Me.com by Obadale Cambone. He it's a historical linguistic platform. And so, as you said, Larry, most people, they just take these classifications willy-nilly. But we were talking about how Northern Indian languages are actually related to European languages, even though they're separated by a farther distance. You got that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then another thing that you asked is you questioned whether or not, like you said, historical linguists, you think that historical linguists do not accept these correspondences.
Yeah, due to anything like bias or methodological issues.
Yeah, there are methodological issues, and I would say that most historical linguists do not accept Greenberg's mass comparison methodology at all. They don't accept it at all, and we're getting into Guldeman, and Guldeman, when he looked at Joseph Greenberg's classifications of Khoisan, Nilo-Saharan, Niger-Congo, he said that they were made without any commitment to genetic unity. And he said that using these groupings to make inferences in other fields like anthropology, when people talk about Banto-Congoid metallurgy, or they talk about Afro-Asiaticoid, architecture or lifestyles, and they make all these things, that's not valid because these groupings that you see on that map, they're not made with a commitment to genetic unity. They're actually made for the sake of leaving nothing unclassified. right? That's the central purpose there. So, um, um, yeah. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's more clear.
Yeah. And then if we go deeper, Guldeman, he affirmed that Nilo-Saharan, also known as Eastern Sudanic, was formulated during colonialism. And according to Guldeman, he said it lacks all comprising diagnostic evidence, right? That's what he said about Nilo-Saharan. Nilo-Saharan, formerly known as Eastern Sudanic. This was a colonial-based phyla, and it was not based using the scientific approach in historical comparative linguistics, right? Now, if you look at Bruce Dixon's punctuated equilibrium model, and I'm trying to establish a basis here to let you know that the conventioning the conventional classification system of African languages was not made using the scientific approach, and it is actually what you see in the African school, the Obenga Diopian school, where they advocated for the usage of the Saussure Benveniste Malay methodology of Indo-European linguistics. They advocated that we use a similar model with respect to African languages as opposed to Afro-Asiatic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we can go down the list because if you're unsure about like the historical linguistics on this issue, we could continue to go down the list, and I could just show you different examples of historical linguists invalidating what is the conventional approach that most people outside of linguistics accept, particularly when it comes to archaeology. I mean, I can't mention how many times I've heard Nilo-Saharoid metallurgy, or Bontoid ironworking, or Afro-Asiatic pastoralism, and people try to link specific material industries to specific language families based upon colonial. When you talk about bias, yeah, there's a colonial bias that is anti-scientific and pseudoscientific. So that's where the bias is. But when it comes to the actual scholars of the field, they're not in favor of it. So, according to Bruce Dixon's punctuated equilibrium model, it is impossible to prove the Niger-Congo family valid due to its configuration and the massive amounts of areal diffusion or borrowing, historical contact between the nodes, right? So we talked about that a little bit earlier, how you can borrow words from different languages. And when it comes to Bantu, and a lot of the Niger-Congo languages, because they were made from a synchronic analysis, looking at contemporary languages and looking at the lexical similarities between these languages, there was just been such a massive amount of interaction between the languages in the so-called Bantu area that it is almost impossible to discern a genetic relationship using the specific configuration in Bantu languages and Niger-Congo languages in general. So, and he says, can you ask him to explain the posture and reasoning of his question in a clear matter? Because historical linguistics is not about geographical gaps per se, and in many cases, not at all. Yeah, so like, you want to re-articulate that, because I think you were saying, and we kind of got cut off on the previous live, but you were saying that because of the large gap, you thought that it would be unlikely for them to be related.
Yeah, because of so many things can be in that factor. For example, time. Time can change a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah, like languages can evolve with respect to time. You see that when you see some of the Coptic forms with respect to the ancient Pharaonic forms, and you see the evolution of the language into Coptic, and you see that even with Old English sounding similar to Germanic. Some of the other or Germanic languages, Old English is Germanic, but sounding similar to German. And then as English evolves, it gets closer to English. So a lot of different things can happen. In geography, geographic proximity usually is an instance of borrowing. But as I stated before, that distance and that time gap actually makes a stronger case for genetic unity, because we don't have a mechanism for borrowing to explain it away. So
Yeah, it's like I was saying before how where you're stated or where you are geographically can influence the language
oh
and
yeah.
change it.
Yeah, no, especially with colonial perspective. So like on this issue, because I could keep going for a long time. Like Dr. Arlen Wilson Wright, he says that it is impossible to prove a relationship between the ancient Kemetic language and Semitic using conventional historical linguistic methodology. So like this is another historical linguistic researcher who says that when it comes to Afro-Asiatic, like you're not, it's impossible to prove the relationship between that, right? So this is just any example. So like on this point, the linguistic point, do you have any other questions, or is anything else seem unclear, or do you want to? Because I'm free to take any questions, any skeptical questions. You told me you were a skeptic, so I'm free to take any skeptical questions that you have when it comes to the connection between the Pharaonic and inter-African civilization. So ask away.
How do you distinguish between real features and true genetic linguistic relationship when discussing Egyptian or sub-Saharan African languages?
So you're suggesting that when it comes to the similarities, they are borrowed. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, many people have spoken about that before to me when I've made these correlations, and I could just trace it a little bit far back to the very, very beginning. Let's see what we got here. So, when you're talking about borrowing, in order to discern that it's not borrowing, you have to have regular, systematic, non-accidental sound correspondences between the Pharaonic language and modern African languages, right? So many scholars have undertaken this, and we can find these correspondences, particularly with respect to the vowel systems, right? So when it comes to the vowel systems, we're able to observe that the O would correspond to U in so-called Niger-Congo languages, and whereas the A sound in Coptic would correspond to E in these same languages. And then that same A would correspond to U in, Cushitic and Nilotic. And these are just examples of, some of the analysis, the putative analysis that was made by Theophilo Benga when it comes to the vowel system, right? Now, when you're talking about some of the phonetic correspondences, you see a voiced bilabial plosive, or the B sound, corresponding and being regular. Whereas sometimes you may see it change and transition into a unvoiced or a P sound, and then you have the nasal and the M, and then the a fricative with the V. So you see these distinct changes with respect to, but you see recurring non-accidental sound correspondences, with respect to these specific terms. An example of this is the word divide. And notice how we're gonna be dealing with basic lexical items or basic vocabulary, as opposed to cultural items, which are more subject to change. So if you look at the initial P in Pisish, or divide, this is going to correspond to an F in Coptic. And as you were saying before, with time, that could change the evolution of the language. So in Coptic, or the late stage of Metrem and Kimi, you see it as Fachi. That Pisish becomes a Fachi. And in Fang, in the Fang language in Cameroon, that becomes Efa or Efashi, right? And you see that systematic correspondence right there. Or Efa in Fang, and then Bambara, the Bambara language of Mali in West Africa, it sees Afasi. So, it maintains, it transitions into an F, like that P becomes that F in Coptic and Fang in Central Africa and Bambara in West Africa, while remaining a P in some of the so-called Bantu languages. So you see that same Pasish divide in the Pharaonic language become Basa in Mbochi, Kikongo, and Bangwe, as well as Basula, right? Now in Lingala, you have another related term within the semantic field. You see Mapasa, which refers to twins, right? So then you can also see another example of this in Pongwe, where that P evolves into a V, and it becomes Vasa in Pongwe. And then in Fogni, in the Casamance region, it becomes Vasa. So you can see this recurring phonetic evolution following a pattern of P, F, V, P, F, V. And we see that evolution across languages, not only in African languages, but Indo-European languages as well, right? In another case of this, you see the voice dental nasal consonant no demonstrate regularity at the middle or final position in Metrem and Kimi in West African languages. And you see it in the word for bad, right? You see bin, boni, boni. So in Bantu languages, that final n is lost, and it becomes bi, be, bia, right? Whereas in Coptic, you see the final T being lost. So the benit or dance becomes bun in Coptic, right? And then sometimes in Bantu languages, you see a final T being lost, such as bina for Mbochi and kina, and you see the development of a k sound, of a velar sound in Kikongo. So the way that you would discern, whether or not there's no borrowing is if you see this phonetic regularity and morphological regularity even across these languages. So like if you see all these correspondences and you want to say that it's borrowing, right, you have to make sure that you have evidence to describe the mechanism of borrowing. Another example here is darkness, right? And you see that voiced velar plosive k sound in darkness. So in Metrem and Kimi, you see kuku, right? And that becomes in Coptic kale or kiki, kiki. And then in Mbochi, that becomes eka, eka. And it maintains the consonantal base of the k for that voiced velar plosive, right? So when you see these words, in this deep phonetic correspondences, if you don't have a way of establishing the mechanism for borrowing, then you can't claim that this is because of borrowing. You still there? I think he left again. You see, I think he left again. He keeps falling off. Yeah, so you say, rich linguistic comparison, waiting for that extended video on Negro-Egyptian. Yeah, that's definitely coming. He said he feels they are different. Can he explain that? Because that's a committed position. When he says that, so he needs to explain before airing questions. Facts. Time bringing change doesn't mean that changing reality of being genetically related language. Yeah, geography usually comes into play with synchronic linguistics, not diachronic historical. So yeah, I'm waiting for the scholar to come back in. But I could keep on going with these connections as we wait. I think he's there. Are you there? Yeah, for sure. See you back. I see you back in again. So we can keep moving forward. So you see the dental occlusive consonant again, and you see it disappear in Coptic and Mbochi, leading to diphthongs or two consonants seen in the word for small. So kit in Metrem and Kimi becomes quit in Coptic and kiet in Mbochi, right? And in the Kikongo language, it retains this structure. While in Sango, in Central Africa, you see the preservation of the dental occlusive consonant in kete, in Sango. You there, Larry? I can't hear you. And he says he can't hear me. So let me see if I can get my audio sessions. My audio's back in. My audio's here. It says that it's playing. So I'm gonna see if I can get him back in, get him resurrected from the dead like Osar. Yeah. In the meantime, I can take questions from the chat.
Hear me?
In the meantime, take some questions. Good explanation. You actually just told him to do exactly what I was saying in the comments. He needs to explain what he thinks borrowing why. Sango Mangi, my ancestral language. Yeah, that's what's up. That's what's up. That's nice. That is what is good in the neighborhood. That is what's up. We finna get back in soon. Just need to make sure that the right link is good.
Looks
Yeah,
like
that's a good question. So we're gonna keep going on, moving forward. So again, you see this with the voiceless velar plosive consonant k, introduced by the voiceless alveolar fricative s sound. And an example of this is agricultural terms. So you see ska in Metrem and Kimi becomes sakai in Coptic and saka in Mbochi, with Kakongo showing a similar pattern in kusaka. So you see the phonetic frame of s and k being stable across the languages. So moving forward, the name for man, right? When it comes to and again, I'm showing systematic, correspondences with respect to basic lexical items. So the apical alveolar vibrant consonant r presents an intriguing phonetic evolution, right? So when it comes to Metrem and Kimi, remech, which refers to man or human, becomes romi in Coptic, right? While in the newer language of Sudan, it becomes ram, right? So in Azer in Mali, it's remi or remi. So this is just an example of so-called Nilotic, so-called Niger Congo, so-called Cushitic, saying that there's a systematic correspondences between the term for man. So, moving forward, what do you think of Asari Imhotep's attempt to give indigenous African names to language families? Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with that. He has the right to do that if he's a researcher, because linguists do that. He uses Chianan too, which he got from Bololo, and then he's made some of his own language titles. I think that's perfectly fine. I just don't think the methodology that he uses is faithful to what is considered historical linguistics. I think he invents a lot of the different terminology, or not the terminology, the different methodologies. I think you're back. Yeah, you are definitely back. Can you hear me? Yeah, I hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got you. You're a little bit robotic, but I'm gonna help you out again with some of your audio settings. I got
Okay.
Okay, so did you understand what we were going over?
Yeah.
So with respect to your question, you're saying how do you know that it's borrowing? I'm showing systematic correspondences here. Are you able to understand this?
Yeah, I can understand it mostly.
Okay, so do you see how when it comes to basic vocabulary, languages that according to the Greenbergian definition, they wouldn't be related. These so-called Niger Congo, Nilo-Saharan, I shouldn't be able to find a relationship between these languages and the Pharaonic language if the Pharaonic is Afro-Asiatic. But I'm finding clear correspondences at the phonetic level between these vocabulary words, right? So
Mm-hmm.
how would you explain that if they're not related?
No, you can't explain it. I
Right.
guess.
Right. So look at this one. Look at
Yeah.
when you see the r, when you see that apical alveolar vibrant consonant, the r, and it turns into the l, like a liquid, right? And that's something that's seen across languages. So you look at the Fayumic dialect of Coptic, it becomes lomi. Ramech becomes lomi in man, as in man. In Bochi you see olomi. In the Luba, Kaluba, or Baluba language, mulumi. Topoke ilomi. Teke lumi. Right? And you also see it become N in certain languages. Fang in Cameroon is nunum, mpongwe onomi, vili nuni. Right? And you also see a zero series where it loses the sound in the Tetela language of Zaire, omi, Lomongo Ntomba, bo omi. Right? And when you're looking at all of these, so like you have to be able to admit that yeah, there's something there. There's something, you know, there's something in these languages that proves a genetic relationship. And
Okay.
and then this comment here says I think he uses Chicom as well as for Negro Egyptian, which I prefer as a name, but admittedly don't entirely understand Imhotep's methodology. Whereas Obanga's work is at least clear to me. Yeah, when Asar Imhotep uses Chicom, he's basically using a Chaluba rendering of the Pharaonic language. Com for black, and he probably would say it means agricultural field or whatever. But he's using a Chaluba rendering, and you could render the Pharaonic language in any language. Like you could use a Yoruba rendering, a Fulani rendering. So yeah, I don't necessarily have a problem with that per se. But the methodology, I think that where I lose him is where he tries to castigate Obanga and Diop when they advocated for the following of the Saussure Benveniste Malay model of historical linguistics, even though they weren't perfect. But when Asar tries to compare a dead language with living African languages, especially not using Coptic to discern the evolution of the language, that's a problem. So the Obangian methodology is the standard historical linguistic methodology that is used in the field. So it's obviously going to be better. So peace and power to the Kemetic family. Brother Kamji is correct. We see this in Asia as well. The Chinese-Japan connection in language. Yeah, that's actually a little bit more controversial because from my research, there hasn't really been a connection established genetically between Chinese and Japanese, though they use the same kanji writing system. There hasn't been a pure connection, and many people have noticed similarities between Igbo and Japanese, but that would be chance. That wouldn't necessarily be the same. And then he says darkness in Sangon Bagni is Avoko. It follows the same system. Yeah, no, yeah. So with respect to these, like, okay, well, what would you say about this? Do you accept that there is a genetic relationship between the Pharaonic language and these inter-African languages, or do you still have some skepticism?
I mean, I guess I can accept it, but um, so you'd have to. So this leads on to one of my other questions, my archaeological questions.
Uh huh.
Is there material evidence like temples, tombs, inscriptions, artifacts that clearly demonstrate contact or migration between these two people of Kemet and West or Central Africa? Because you said
Mm-hmm.
they have to be in contact, right?
For
So,
borrowing, yeah.
yeah, for borrowing.
Yeah, so you're saying, well let me ask you the question, like when you're asking for the archaeological link, like what is the implication there? What is the implication? Are you saying that does the archaeological link invalidate the connection? Because as I stated before, if there is no evidence of that link, then that actually makes the linguistic stuff a little bit more valid, right? So like what
You think
exactly?
so?
As I explained, because if you find a systematic correspondence and you don't have the mechanism for borrowing, then it's kind of just, and you're talking about borrowing across the continent on a continental scale. So you would need to describe how the pharaohs went to each and every civilization on the continent and spread their culture, you know, and with the time consideration that would be unlikely. But in terms of, so we can go to archaeology. So in terms of the direct evidence, you have the Mentuhotep II inscription in Jebel Awaynot, which describes the Amduat, which describes the ancient Kemites traveling to the Lake Chad Basin. Right, that's the direct specific evidence. But when it comes to, when you talk about monuments and artifacts, typically speaking, you're going to be dealing with an evolution, like you're going to be dealing with an evolutionary transition over time, if that makes sense. So like what exactly explain the question, ask the question again, ask the question one more time.
Where is the material evidence, for example, temples, tombs, inscriptions, or artifacts that clearly demonstrate sustained contact or migration from Kemet to West or Central Africa?
Okay, the migration piece I can deal with. I can deal with the migration piece. So, like when you talk about the specific evidence of migration, you have Peter Brunick's in his analysis of bifacially retouched wing projectile points, right? In Nigeria, in Zillam, Nigeria. This supports a link between pre-dynastic Kemet because you see the same projectile points, these same type of projectile points, like in the Western Desert in the pre-dynastic context, prior to seeing them in West Africa. So this is connected to a migration at the end of the humid period from Northeast Africa into West Africa. And this is also supported by pastoral evidence, the genetics of these pastoral domesticates. But this is like a very, very clear indication because within the Zillam in Nigeria and even the Kintampo culture of Ghana, you see these bifacially retouched, and you understand what a bifacially retouched projectile point is, right?
Right.
And you see them in the top right corner. So that's one example of an archaeological instance of migration.
Okay.
And you saying stringed instruments? Yeah, that's another one. So we could go down the list. Hold on a sec. When you look at these highly burnished slip sherds at the Gaji Ghana site, that's another example of the connection. You see these burnished slip sherds in Gaji Ghana, right, in the Lake Chad Basin, and you first see those in ancient Nubia, and you see those wests associated with the Leiderbond complex archaeologically. So that's an example of a connection with respect to burnished sherds. Burnished sherds are another indication of Nile Valley or Happy River Basin technologies migrating over to the west of the continent. So let me move forward and get into the pastoral domesticates. Do you like animals?
Yeah.
Yeah, you sure?
Yeah.
So when you see some of these pastoric domesticates, they are associated with a migration of the managing populations, because a domesticate, in order to have a domesticate, you have to have a human population managing that domesticate. So when we see the remains of these different animal species, they show that populations are moving from Northeast Africa to West Africa. Equus ferus forma cabilis, which is the domestic horse. You see this in the second intermediate period of Kemet, followed by discoveries in northern Cameroon during the 8th century in the Akumbi Mali from 600 to 1000 AD. So the horses that they seen, this Equus ferus forma cabilis that you see in northern Cameroon, this is a descendant of the same species founded in Kemet during the second intermediate period. And that's with respect to horses. Now, when you look at Bos primigenius taurus, or the cow, you see them in the 9th millennia BC, in the western desert of Kemet. And then you see them in Mali, in West Africa, from 2200 to 850 BC. And then the Kubati zone from 1600 BC. So all of the freaking Tichet ideologues who believe that Tichet proves that there's a separate cultural center in West Africa that is disconnected from the other aspects of the continent, particularly the Pharaonic civilization. If you look at cattle domestication, these cattle remains, in West Africa are a descendant of cattle, further in Northeast Africa. Moving forward, we can go to the Zebu cattle, Bos primigenius forma indicus, known in the New Kingdom period, and then it became known in West Africa in Geno Mali and Surrey, Senegal from 800 to 1400 AD of the Common Era. Then you have, do you like dogs?
Yeah.
Look at Canis lupus familiaris. Canis lupus familiaris, or the domestic dog, is first seen on the African continent in the 6th millennium BC in Northeast Africa, right? And then you see them in West Africa during the Gajigana phase, the same phase that we were talking about, those burnish-lipped sherds, from 1200 to 1000 BC, right? So all of the dogs, or the predominantly the African dog species, right? The dog species that you see across the continent, from the Basenji dog, the Congo dog, they are descendants of dogs seen in Northeast Africa during the 6th millennia BC that migrated downward. Look at the donkey. Well, you talk about Equus africanus forma asinus, first seen in the second half of the 4th millennia BC. Then it's seen in Western Africa, during 0 to 250 AD for the domestic dog. And you can keep going on. Camelus thomasi forma dromedarius, first seen in the 1st millennia BCE in Kemet. Then in West Africa, you see these camels from 250 to 400 AD. Sus scorfa forma domestica, the pig, right? The pig. I know a lot of Muslims probably don't like to eat pig, but you see them in 5th millennia BC in Merimde and Kemet, and then you see them in West Africa in the 2nd millennia AD. And it goes on and on and on with goats. You find the same situation with goats from the 6th millennia BCE to Kemet to 2200 BCE in Mali, right? With chickens. You like chicken?
Yeah.
You like to eat chicken? Gallus forma domestica, right? Migrated from Kemet to West Africa. You see it in the 2nd millennia BCE in Kemet, then in Infraser West Africa in the 6th century AD in Burkina Faso, in Genu Mali, from 500 to 850. Gallus domestica, these African chicken species, they were seen in Northeast Africa, before the end of the humid period, and then they migrated to the west of the African continent. You like cats?
Mm.
You don't like cats? Felis catus. Felis catus is a species. Felis catus is actually, most domestic cats on the planet descend from the cat seen in ancient Kemet because they have haplotype 4. With respect to the African continent, many African cultures use cats to hunt rodents in their palaces. So they have the ancient Kemites to thank when it comes to the domestication of cats. That Felis catus is seen, according to Dr. Claudio Ottoni's analysis, Felis catus dispersed across the African continent from the Pharaonic civilization. And we could go down the list. I mean, look, there's a lot of these. So like I could go from on and on and on and on and on. But again, with animals alone, like just animals, with just animals alone, we can show at least a migration across the millennia from the Pharaonic civilization in West Africa. Go ahead.
These finds also go into one of my questions. are these finds peer-reviewed archaeological reports from like credible institutions that
Yep.
affirm the Egyptian presence
Yeah.
or
So
influence in sub-Saharan African places?
yeah, this is from Dr. Colin Jeromack. The previous examples I gave were from Dr. Vera Linciel, and she wrote an article in a book called Pastoralisms in Africa. And she wrote basically proving a Northeast African contemporary with the Pharaonic civilization dispersal of pastoral domesticates into infra-Saharan Western Central Africa. So then Colin Jeromack, he finds Columbia livia forma domestica, and this is the pigeon, and he finds those in the Pharaonic civilization. And then Dr. Roger Blench sees a continuation of these pigeon raising practices with mud columbaria. And even they called these pigeons birds of Egypt in West and Central African languages. So that's showing that they knew that these domesticates in Columbia livia forma domestica, came from the Pharaonic civilization. Dr. Patrick F. Houlihan, in another peer-reviewed report, shows that the Egyptian geese, Alapochin aegyptica, was domesticated in the Pharaonic civilization. And then Dr. Roger Blench found bones of this species in Carthage from the 6th to 7th century, right? And there's also the presence of geese in medieval West Africa related to trade routes from North Africa, which contributed to the emergence of empires like the Niani Empire, which is Mali, or Songhai. And it goes down the list. Houlihan also finds Streptopelia tortor, right? And this is the turtle dove, and it was domesticated in the Pharaonic civilization during the 5th dynasty. And Roger Blench finds its usage today across West and Central Africa. So yeah, these are all connected to studies, peer-reviewed reports, all of this analysis, like the crow. You see it in Kano in West Africa, in Nigeria. Corvus albus is the species, from the Pharaonic civilization. The common crane, so on and so forth.
All right. So going on to another question is, how do you respond to the absences of Egyptian style monumental architecture, writing systems, or statecraft in most sub-Saharan African prior to the medieval period? Because you said the material evidence right before is shows that there's a connection from Kemet to West or Central Africa. So why is there this big absence in
like monuments?
Monuments.
So the argument, and I've heard this argument before. You're saying that because there's no temples, because there's no pyramids, because there's none of these things, that shows that there must have not been a sustained, because it's like people have asked the questions like, why don't the Bantus build pyramids, or why don't, in the Sahel, why don't you see like these large Egyptian temples in the Sahel? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a pretty good question, and hit the like and subscribe if you're enjoying the show. Dollar sign or dollar sign Comgyverse if you want to support on Cash App. I'm gonna put the link in the chat. Larry here, our guest, our scholar, asked a very, very good question. A question that I've heard quite a few times from skeptics of this content, just trying to see if there's any evidence of the monumental structure. I did not mean to do that. Actually, my bad. I did not mean to take that off the screen. He's asking if there's any evidence of the monumental structure in Western Central Africa. So what I would say to that question is there is an evolution. So when the populations from the Pharaonic civilization were beginning to migrate into Western Central Africa, there was a evolution of a lot of these forms that we see. Right? And I'm gonna just double check to make sure that was good. You still there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still here.
You still there? So yeah, if y'all like the show, hit the Cash App. We're gonna get into just some of the different facts that we have at our disposal about the evolution of these architectural forms, because our young scholar here is asking for evidence of just some of the different monumental architecture. These are material cultural evidence of these different and the artifact. If you want to have a question about the artifacts, we can get into that. But Salim Faragi, he actually researched some of the mound traditions in West Africa, and he found these stone circle mounds dating from the 6th to the 14th centuries, and they feature a central pit covered by an earthen mound surrounded by stones, kind of what you see in the picture there. And this architectural style originated from the stone circle tumuli of the A group of Kerma and Kush in the Sahel, dating back to the 3rd millennia BCE. So this is Dr. Salim Faragi's research about the different mound traditions. And then he saw in the Derby Tukashei tumuli, which date from the 13th to the 16th century CE and are located in central West Africa near Lake Chad and the Benue-Niger River basins. He demonstrated a clear link to the tumuli in the Middle Nile Valley, particularly the Balana and Marcurian mounds of late antique Nubia. And then his analysis of the Senegambian mounds were influenced by the ancient stela-enriched mounds of the C group of Nubia. So the stele mounds that he saw in Senegambia, he found similarities between the mounds of the C group in Nubia. Right, and then you have Namdi Ella. Namdi Ella, like when you're looking at these different architectural traditions in Africa, they actually come from the same source. If you look at some of the specific components, you look at the adobe bricks. Adobe is actually from the Pharaonic language, debit. It's a borrowing into Latin and Spanish, right? The thing that we define earthen bricks or adobe bricks is actually from the Pharaonic language. So that when you see these earthenware bricks, when you see vaulted roofs with ventilation openings, the courtyard and pluvium. So when you're talking about courtyards and especially rainwater collection in courtyards, external stairs, when you talk about the architecture mimicking the environment, when you talk about a fractal understanding of space, right, and framed openings or doors and window, moldings on top of the doors and windows, when you see these projecting sills or the sill beneath the window projecting from the wall, like these different architectural elements define, architecture on the African continent, particularly the evolution from some of the old kingdom house forms, and then the modern inter-African house forms, or in the modern inter-African architecture. So there's an evolutionary sequence that can be observed with respect to these different traditions. Does that make sense, or do you need more evidence?
It kind of makes sense if you go a little bit more in depth with that.
Okay, so we can I can maybe show you an example of some of the architectural forms, and we could see if we can find some of these different architectural elements. So Namdi Ella, what he's talking about, he's talking about these different elements, and he says that across African architecture, across the continent, you can see the evolution of these forms within different environmental contexts. Because, if you're in the rainforest in Congo, you also got to think about efficiency. They didn't necessarily need they didn't need to build with big stones. It's more efficient to build with, bamboo or what's it called? Raffia palm. So he says, yeah, it's a severely recycled question. Very strange question from Jeremiah D. Yeah, and that's why I thought it was good to have this skeptic conversation, just to deal with Black Kemet on trial. They asked that rather than asking why the current population claims to be indigenous don't build pyramids anymore. Yeah, I haven't seen any of the Arabs in Egypt building any pyramids. That's a pretty good point. What about the ancient maps of Europe showing cities and castles in Africa before the push of colonization? Yeah, very, very good point. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you an example So I'm going to show you an example of what I'm talking about here real quickly. This is on Reddit. You see that?
No, I can't see it.
Do you have the live on a different browser?
Yeah.
Yeah, or you can have it on. Are you using your phone or a computer?
Computer.
Yeah, if you could bring up the live on your phone, you'll be able to see the screen, because I know you're in the backdrop. But I have the Banjul Palace in Cameroon on the screen, in West Cameroon.
I can see it now.
Okay, so do you see any environmental mimicry in this structure?
I mean, it sort of looks like a tree, a really big tree.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at now, is the roof flat or is it vaulted?
Vaulted.
It's vaulted, and look at the columns. The columns seem to be imitating tree branches.
Yeah, right.
Right, and the tools, like the Bamileke in Western Cameroon, they build a lot with bamboo, so you can see them using bamboo here. So it's just like, there's many different examples of these African architectural themes here. But I can see the vaulted roof with the ventilation, and it's actually a pyramid. If you look at how Bamilekes build their palaces, they actually build like a giant pyramid on the top of it. And I'm gonna see if I could find an example of that. But like, you see the thatched roof above it, but you don't actually see like the pyramid. I'm gonna see if I could find a video actually. See if they have a video of this somewhere. Crap, did I have this on? Yeah, I don't know if this is gonna show it right. I'm looking at let's see if I can find it on YouTube. Let me see if I could find this. I want to show you an example of this in action.
Okay.
There it is.
This is how ancient Bamileke built their chief's palace.
This is without history.
The Bamileke live in western Cameroon and are part of the Niger-Congo family.
And he put the Niger-Congo thing in there. It's all good though. It's all good. He's been learning. He's been without history. Without history, he's been learning. He's been learning.
This is how ancient Bamileke built their chief's
You
palace.
see that?
The Bamileke live in western Cameroon and are part of the Niger-Congo family. Their art and culture is world-renowned.
No.
Oh, you don't see it on the screen? Can everybody see and hear
Their
it?
wooden castle architecture is
Give me a
just
1
something
if
to
you can
behold.
see and hear it. It shows the people building
No, I
together.
can see
Primarily built
it.
for the chiefs,
I can
the
see it
different
now.
segments of the palace were built separately.
You see
and the
that
precise
pyramid? Look at them build a
dimensions were
pyramid.
attached.
That giant bamboo
Yeah.
pyramid. Look at that. They're building a
At this
giant
scale,
pyramid.
This process requires uncanny mathematical precision. This was a group effort where community expertise in planning, woodwork, architecture, structural engineering, material science, and group coordination came together. You will notice each wooden column is adorned with intricate cultural carvings. Just like in Kemet, these pylons are functional and expressive.
See that? Look at that.
Yeah.
That's a Fumbon
This is
Palace.
how ancient Bamileke built their chief's
Right. So
palace.
we could look at.
The Bamileke live in western
Before we
Cameroon
even
and are part of the
continue,
Niger-Congo family.
I'm gonna keep it
Their
playing.
art and
music.
culture is world-renowned.
I'm gonna find you another example of the Fumbon Palace
Their wooden castle architecture
for
is just
Ibrahim and
something to
Joya.
behold. Primarily built for the chiefs, the different segments of the palace were built separately
So,
and to precise dimensions, and then
Um,
attached.
since people have, I think there's an
At
absence
these
of
scales,
Egyptian
this
style
process requires
monumental
uncanny
architecture,
mathematical precision.
could be that they're oblivious to what
This
they
was a
actually
group
see
effort where
around them.
community expertise in planning.
No, definitely. I'm trying to find this. I didn't want to do that. No, I mean they're not familiar with the evolution. They're not familiar with the evolution of these forms. You know what I'm saying? Because in order to to understand and know what the architecture is, you have to be able to trace the evolution through time. And if you don't understand the forms, you could ask a very, very simplistic question with respect to, you know, what it actually, what you're actually seeing right in front of you, right? So I'm trying to bring up this palace. It's kind of annoying me that I can't get it up. Open image in new tab. Here it is. Okay, so with respect to this is another example. The Funbon Palace. You see King Njoya right there. And you can see the palace right there. You can see vaulted roofs right there. You see a little bit of the projecting sills and the framed opening moldings on top of it right there. But this is an example of the first Funbon Palace before being burned and reconstructed in 1913. Right? So if I bring up the modern palace in Funbon in Cameroon, Western Cameroon specifically, you can see some of more of the elements. I'm trying to get a good picture. This is an okay one. Right, you can see some of the other elements here. So I'm going to ask you if you can see them, if you can point them out, right? So going back to it, do you see the vaulted roof?
Yeah, I see the vaulted roof, and then the pillars again.
Mm-hmm. Do you see the projecting sills? You can't really see it closely here, but like the bottom of the window projecting out.
Yeah.
You see that? Okay, cool. Now, do you see a courtyard?
Yep.
Yeah, you see a courtyard. External stairs is one. Moldings on top of the windows and the doors. Like I see that there with that little window right there on the side. Mostly all the windows have a molding type above it. Now the reason why I'm showing this is because, you know, a lot of people would suggest that the Bamum Palace is built in memory of the Germans or King Njoya copying the Germans. But I actually have a video on my channel about this, and the video coming up kind of refuting that notion. So you can see it even in the Funbon Palace, many of those architectural forms in classical Africa, in the Pharaonic civilization. So again, as I'm stating before, you have to look at the specific prototypical architectural elements and then trace their evolution with respect to space, time, and the built environment. That's going to help you locate where are these different architectural traditions, because from an engineering perspective, what you did, 4,000 years ago may not be suitable today. So you have to actually, refine some of your techniques in order to have a better result, or have the optimal result.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of civilizations, well, for example, obviously the pyramids, it would shows like ancient Egypt's architectural prowess, like the Mayans, even in on the other side of the planet, some Asian countries have architectural things that relate to the pyramids, like the I don't know if you're familiar with some Chinese buildings and how they have the vaulted roof and the pillars too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say that the difference is, because I think you're implying that you could see a lot of these elements in many civilizations, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're implying or no?
Yeah, that is what I'm implying.
Are you muted?
Hello?
I still see you here. Yeah, are you there?
That is what I was implying.
Yeah, so the difference would be is because you have other pieces of evidence to show that these populations are related. Like with King Njoya specifically, like he actually mentioned within his history and customs, or his sangam, that the patriarch of the Bamum, he called him an Egyptian merchant, Aseji. Now, further analysis shows that Aseji was actually related to the Mandara people, or he was a descendant of Ajar, the first Mandara.
But Ibrahim Njoya, like, he actually wrote down, like, this isn't an oral testimony. He wrote it down in literature within the Bamum writing and language that the patriarch of the Bamum was a Seji, right? A Seji being a Kemetic merchant. So he's effectively connecting the Mandara people, which would be a so-called Chadic people in northern Cameroon, to the Pharaonic civilization. So with that piece of orature, it becomes likely for us to trace, the architectural evolution of the specific building systems, because it's not only just a vaulted roof, it's multiple, like it's the adobe bricks, the earthenware, the fractal proxemics, fractal understanding, African geometry being non-Euclidean. Say that again.
No, I agree. That is true. The materials that they use.
Yeah, it's the full gambit. It's the full gambit of everything in combination. So that in and of itself is going to show you that there's a relationship here, and that's going to be how we can use these different facets of information to trace the evolution of these building systems and these architectural traditions. And then Doravel says material in the environment is not the same in all geographical locations. That's very true. When you have people mixing, they will mix technology. It's very true. The pyramid structure is known to have beneficial health and environmental cleansing. Facts. Style of architecture is also in the northern savannic region of Ghana, among the Dagomba and the Kakomba. Yeah, you answered it very well. Requires multifaceted explanation. Yeah, no, definitely. So with respect to this, like, what do you think about that in terms of understanding the evolution?
I think it makes much more sense. You just have to change your perspective, Like I said before, a lot of people can be oblivious to it, like I was, and now I can see.
Oh yeah, no, you seem like a very fair person, willing to, accept new information. And that's what I like. It's okay to be skeptical, but like when you get information that, changes your perspective, you also have to see, okay, I was maybe wrong about that. And look, and for everybody in the audience, this is a young kid. How old are you exactly?
19 years old.
19 years old. So, this 19-year-old young scholar is more mature than a lot of people that I've seen on the internet. So you got to give him credit for that. Even though he was really skeptical about the content, him coming on and being able to listen to some of the evidence, he's been able to, change a little bit some of his perspective. So I think a lot of the adults could learn a lot, from the kids in this generation, especially those who are humble and willing to, take information in. But I'm not going to act like I answered all of your questions. Do you have any more questions, or like, do you have any more things that?
I have a couple more questions.
They're saying there's some echo. Patrina Oldfield, I think you sound a reverb. Can you talk again?
I have a couple more questions. You don't?
Yeah, I don't mind. Let me see if there's. Do I have your? They're saying there's a reverb. Let me see if I got you good. I think you're good. Wait, talk again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you. I'm gonna see.
Okay.
Yeah, Hawass and Joe Rogan. All right. So what are your other questions that you have that you wanna, vibe on a little bit?
These are about some genetics. So, what specific genetic markers have been identified that prove a direct lineage between ancient Egyptians and like modern West Central African populations?
From a genetic perspective, okay. So with respect to genetics, you're going to be looking at EM2 and EM35 particularly. Those are going to be the markers that you're dealing with when it comes to these connections. EM35 is a prominent one. So you see the some of the subclade descendants of EM35 in Central and Western Africa. And I'm going to go into... find my... Okay. So according to Dadanazio, Eugenia Dadanazio, you find the specific subclades of EM35. in ECTS 693, and that's called the Nakadan marker, because you see that in Nakada, and you find ECTS 693 in among the Soninke and other West African populations, and that's the bottom third panel right there. So you can see that it's the darkest. You said reverb again. You see it's the darkest. I'm gonna try to, because when I turned the sound gate on, that helped you. That helped you out a little bit. So you see the darkest there in Egypt. You see that?
Yeah, I do see that.
So ECTS 693, they literally call that EV12 star. That's called the Nakadan marker from Nakada, right? So like you see the Nakadan marker into West Africa. You see that? So it's descended, and you even see it going down into Sudan. You see it in Chad. You see it in Niger. You may even see it a little bit in Burkina Faso, but you see it in Mali and Mauritania. So that's one example. Then you have EV6873, and you see that, you know, in Northeast Africa, and that goes into the in West Africa 6,000 to 5,000 years ago. So that's one example. Then when you look at EM2 specifically, and you see EM2 subclades, specifically EZ15941, which you see on the second panel to the right or to the left. EL516, you see that on the bottom left right there. And then you have EV5001, and that's going to be primarily in Northeast Africa. But each of these clades, according to the research of Dr. Dadanazio, is originated in Lake Chad, migrated north 10,000 years ago. Then 4,000 years ago, there was a massive movement south into infra-Saharan Africa. And this can be connected to a lot of the pastoral domesticates that we saw that migrated after the end of the humid period into West Africa. So that's EM2 there that you can see if you wanted to show that. And there's quite a few more. If you look at EV1515, which specifically came from Northeast Africa, its descendant in EM293 is seen across Central and Southern Africa. And you can see EM293 in the middle panel on the bottom. And you can see it, you know, migrate all the way down into Central and Southern Africa. So EV1515 again started in Northeast Africa, and then during this period, it migrated downwards. So moving forward, these are phylogenetic markers specifically. You have M1A. You see M1A across West Africa, and you can see that dark one. It originated in Northeast Africa before migrating to the west. You have L2A2, and that's another one that originated in the area of Sudan, and then also is seen in Congo and Central Africa. Then you have LOA1, particularly LOA1B1A3, right? And that's seen in Cameroon, and that's associated with a Northeast African origin. So there's quite a few, genetic, phylogenetic specifically markers showing this bond. And then there's other cases, if you want to do genome-wide studies with the autosomal. I don't know if you're going to mention the Abusir study, Abusir Malek, but that's a pretty popular one that people mention. But there's quite a few, connections showing this bond.
Okay, but have these claims been supported by population geneticists or interdisciplinary studies?
Yeah, they have been. I'm going to go to another example to illustrate that point. Like if you look at Busby et al., Dr. Busby et al., he's showing that modern West Africans, particularly in Gambia, have Sudanic ancestry that reflects a migration across the Sahel about 2,000 years ago, confirming the Ethiopian migration model. So Dr. Busby et al. Did a full-scale analysis of different African populations, and he was able to locate a Sudanic ancestry that migrated across the Sahel, right? So that's one predominant example. So then you have by Dr. Gourdin et al., Jean-Philippe Gourdin, and he did an analysis of tuberculosis in the Middle Kingdom. And he found the presence of West African strains of tuberculosis. And you can see them on the screen right there, L5 and L6 being in Senegambia, L5 being in yellow and L6 being in green. And he found that exact strain in the Middle Kingdom. So this could mean either that the ancestor of this strain existed in the Sahara, or the parent strain was in the Middle Kingdom, and then they migrated over into Senegambia. And now you see that same strain that was in the Middle Kingdom in Senegambia today. So then you have leprosy. And I don't know, were you going to ask me about the Abasir study? Were you going to mention Abasir, Malek?
No, that wasn't one of my questions.
Okay, for sure. Well, if you look at the late period at Abusir, you see the 3L strain of leprosy. And this same strain is also found in West Africa and Brazil. So when it comes to Abasir Malek, a lot of people try to act as if, this shows that they're more closely, the Pharaonic civilization is more closely related to the Levantine or the Anatolian farmers or West Asia. But even during, this period of time, you see the 3L genotype that of leprosy that is seen in West Africa and among Afro-Brazilian populations. And then you also see the S15 genotype, which is a relative of the 3L genotype, seen in Martinique in the Caribbean islands. So that's another case of that. Then you obviously sickle cell anemia. So the sickle cell thing that is used to avoid malaria. You see the sickle cell, the HBS sickle cell haplotype in Benin. You see that in the Pharaonic civilization, meaning that the ancestors of this population likely existed in the western Sahelo-Sahara zone before migrating to the east, right? That's what explains the Benin haplotype. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. I can see.
And then so that's basically with respect to the specific population genetic studies. And I wanted to talk about the schistosomes. I don't know if I put that here. I don't think I did. Yeah, I don't think I did. Oh, Nancy Bird et al. And this is another one. This is another population, Central African population study, which shows a Kemetic component in the Grassfields people of Cameroon, Bamileke people of Cameroon, also the Igbo people, Cross River Valley people in southeastern Nigeria. You see this component there, and you can see, with Njoya, King Njoya right there, in his depiction of his ancestry, he talks about Nchare, which would be one of his, I think his 14 or 15 times great-grandfather in the Bamum lineage. He writes about a Seji, a Seji being the Egyptian merchant in his lineage, and then a Seji would be a descendant of Sekenre Tau. If you do the genealogy for the specific Mandara, Sekenre Tau would be a 17th dynasty pharaoh. So you could use King Njoya's literature to trace the lineage from the Grassfields populations back to the Pharaonic civilization. And according to Dr. Nancy Bird et al.'s analysis, her population genetics analysis, you can see a component from Egypt that migrated over around the same time that the Bamileke articulate that their Baladi ancestors in the 9th century left and migrated to the Lake Chad Basin before migrating to Cameroon. So this is an example of population genetic studies matching with the oral testimonies of the African populations. Does that answer is satisfactory?
Yeah.
For sure. And the comments are saying, nice to see a young man so interesting in our history. Love it, open your mind, and know the true history. Every question is so important. I agree. Definitely agree. So what else you got? Anything else? Any other skeptical things that you've seen on the channel that you want to ask about?
I have one final question.
For sure.
It's more, I guess you could say, personal. How do you guard against confirmation bias and the temptation to retroactively impose connections based on cultural pride or political ideology?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I would say that I don't think that there is much confirmation bias. I would disagree. Now, some people may say that in the African-centered space, like there's a tendency to make everyone black, which I don't entirely agree with that, though I have seen that on these different platforms. What I would more so say is that there is a tendency to want to castigate a lot of African-centered scholars more than there is a confirmation bias. Because even in the digital space, I don't know if you're familiar, but you have different groups of people, you know, from the Moors to the Hebrew Israelites to et cetera, et cetera. And I think that the best way to be able to navigate within these spaces is to have a rigorous scientific approach and a rigorous methodology to be able to discern truth from falsehood. That's a super, super important thing. And I would say that as long as if you have a rigorous scientific approach and you're secure with your methodology, you have things checked by peers and elders, like it's a really good way to guard against any biases. Because even, you know, myself, I see certain things that I am unsure about or are not true, or sometimes things I get new information that can alter my perspective a little bit. But a lot of this stuff, you know, is hours and hours and hours of research that led me to these conclusions. So it's coming from a very, very rigorous stance, and that's kind of the methodology that I use to be able to not be biased.
Okay.
And I got a question. I mean, as a skeptic, like, what led you to skepticism? Like, is this TikTok or YouTube, like, or is it just something that you thought, I don't think that this is valid, I don't think that this is true, you know, like, what led you to this position?
Well, a lot of most of my family is West African, and I've heard a lot of stories about our culture, and really, I just wanted to learn the truth. I just want to know the truth and find my own understanding about all this stuff.
Well, that's good. That's good. Now when you say West Africa, like, you don't have to tell me the country, but like which collection? Like, are you talking about the Sahel? Are you talking about Equatorial? Like, are you talking about like what are you talking about exactly?
Equatorial.
Equatorial. Okay, okay, okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. So you're basically just trying to get to the bottom of it, of the truth of these origins, and you basically wanted to figure out if, you know, some of the things that you've heard in your family were true.
Yes.
Now, have you met any people who are like North African or Arab or Egyptian in your in college?
Yeah, a lot of my friends are.
What do they think about this connection?
I mean, I guess from what I've heard, a lot of their opinions are biased. It's from like what they heard from their families and what their families told them.
What are some of those opinions?
Like for example, like Egyptians were more fair skinned, looks more like them, ancient Egyptians, and like all that other stuff.
You know how we know that that's false?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of evidence.
Well, they call themselves black.
Yeah.
Why would they call themselves black?
I don't know because they are black.
You see this on my screen?
Yeah.
What does that say? You want to read that?
It's still going. Oh, and in the 18th dynasty, tomb of the royal scribe uh, Keruf, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Upper Egyptian domestic rebels are depicted among the non-Bows and have darker skin tones than Nubians. This refutes the outdated notion that people of is this Kemet
Mm-hmm.
always depicted themselves with reddish brown skin while depicting foreign Nubians as dark skinned.
So you heard of the idea that the Nubians were dark
and
Yeah.
you know everybody else was light and white. But here you see that that's not necessarily true,
Mm-hmm.
right? You see that that's actually a misstatement when it comes to like who they actually were. Like you see the so-called Egyptian here being depicted as darker than the Nubian, right there, right? So that kind of refutes that talking point that a lot of people have, right? In the tomb of Rekhmiri, you see the Nubians being depicted with a reddish brown, the same as the Egyptians, right there. You see in the Thutmose tomb, TT 51, tomb of Usharhat, you know, you see Thutmose the first literally being depicted as black, right there. And you have Amos Nefertari literally being depicted as black, you know, in her tomb context, right there. In the tomb of Inarkau, right, and then you just have like ubiquitous references, you know, from the tomb of Ramses III or the Ramech in the Book of Gates. They're depicted with black skin, right there. In the rock tombs of Mir, in the 6th dynasty Nomarch, Neank Pepi and his son Pepiank are referred to as Hepi the Black and Heni the Black, right? And this is primary textual evidence where they're literally calling themselves black, right? Now, and Chuck Morgan would say that we don't have similar instances of this among the Sumerians, you know, but you know, this is just primary evidence. And then you have Lucian's narrative of the Greeks and the Romans who call them black, and just, you know, all different types of research, and then dealing with them protecting their black city and the black ones. And you know, Walter Crumb's Coptic dictionary, Kem means black person or a thing. In ancient times during the Middle Kingdom, the term Kemu was used in inscriptions at Gebel Girgawi to refer to black people or a collective of black individuals. So they use the term Kemu to talk about black folk in their language. I mean, like, you know, Temple of Esna, and some people say, oh, it means the soil. It means the soil. But like in the Temple of Esna, Khnum, the Netter, molds human beings from black clay, a concept that preserves as a precursor to the creation of man in clay in the Bible and Abrahamic narratives. So Adam was made from the dark clay. Adam or Adamu. So again, like there's just so many different references. Like Pepi's called the Great Black in the Pyramid text. like there's just so many different references just to refute that idea. Right, and this is where do the Cushitic people come from? Looking at the comments, because it seems that people skip Cushitic Semitic people like they don't exist and came to Africa 1,000 years ago all of a sudden. Egyptian looks similar to Berber Cushitic people, West African version. Yeah, I don't know what Melissa's talking about. Maybe I don't know if she's like a Somali or something like that. Are you from Somalia, Melissa? She may be a Somali. Semitic Cushitic language, like, yeah, she may be. Yeah, you got some trolls in the chat. But other than that, this was a pretty good conversation. If anybody from the chat has any other questions, feel free. And if you have any other thing that you want to discuss or break down.
No, you answered all my questions.
Okay, she says she's Black American, FBA. Oh, okay, that's another. Okay, interesting. All right, with that, if no one else has any other questions or anything that they want to go over, we could turn this to a close. What's good, Chematology? Yeah, I'm gonna time out Melissa. She's kind of trolling. I'm gonna put you on timeout. She's trolling too much. But yeah, so yeah, I appreciate you for coming on, and if you want to ever come on,
pleasure.
Absolutely. If you ever want to come on in the future, feel free. And with that, we're about to just close out the show.
Welcome to Kamjiverse. This is your exclusive bridge between the legacy of classical Africa and the triumphs of modern African revolutions. You won't find this connection anywhere else. If you're new here, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell so you never miss an episode. Share this video with friends and family. Become a channel member or join our Patreon. The links are waiting in the description. Let's honor our sacred legacy and ignite our future together.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one, exposing your lies tonight. No scam or false prophet can dim our light. Kemet unfiltered, let pride takes flight.
Shut up, you dumb, you sound like a clue. Get out, stay clear of this room. We proud, we black, rich, and forever stay paid. They lies that Kemet sprang from the soil they mislaid. Their tales are sham, cooked up by scammers who toil. So shut up, chief X, you're a grifter, spoil. Your Bohan drivel like your soul. Coptic verse, their language is liturgical, not to rehearse curse. While Ethiopian and Nubian cops and Cairo so merciful. Drop truth surgical, leaving your myths pitiful.
You act like black folks ain't speaking remake. Give me your idiocy. Runs deep, can't study, can't even see. Bubble brother, hush up before I knock your sugar out. Don't twist our ancestors' lore, I'll butcher your clout.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one, exposing your lies tonight. No scam or false prophet can dim our light. Kemet unfiltered, let pride takes flight.
You claim you came from Baltimore, just more trash on display. I bet the faithful flock was up, dusting your ass away. Into that fat orange cat, you're dumber than a box of rocks. Pushing assimilation as politics to shock like cheap mock.
We spot you for a mile, your act just isn't slick. This is real knowledge, not your chronological scholarship. If you scared, you should be watch as I spit. God's flame, no bars, no game. You're done when I put you to shame.
When your twisted lies crumble and your fake talk fades, our united voice echoes, truth never degrades. From the ashes of the sea, our spirit invades. In Kemet's name, your false crown forever cascades.
Rosie aka Amir, the scam's a total disgrace. Spitting away with one jargon at a crooked scheme and pace. You twist words confused, try to carve up a space. A fraud, your fake gospel body came with no base. You try to fool slow blacks with your bogus empty guys, but your clumsy act crumbles under truth's piercing eyes. Kemet stands united, no room for your deceitful art. Step aside, false prophet, your lies will break a heart.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one, exposing your lies tonight. No scam or false prophet can dim our light. Kemet unfiltered, let pride takes flight.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one, exposing the lies.